The air in the king's chamber is thick, heavy with the scent of sickness and decay. It clings to the tapestries, to the velvet bed curtains, to the very stones of Whitehall Palace. Here, in a gilded cage of pain, lies a mountain of a man, a grotesque parody of the golden prince he once was. He is Henry VIII, King of England, Ireland, and France, defender of the faith, supreme head of the Church of England. And he is dying. His body is a roadmap of his life's excesses and violence. At nearly 400 pounds, he is an immobile titan, hoisted from room to room by a crude system of pulleys. The legendary athletic physique that once captivated the courts of Europe is long gone, buried beneath layers of fat. An old jousting wound on his leg, a souvenir from his virile youth, has festered into a foul-smelling, perpetually weeping ulcer, tormenting him with constant searing pain. His doctors, trembling, approach him with poultices and potions, knowing that a wrong move, a flicker of pain, could earn them a one-way trip to the tower. This is not the triumphant monarch of the Holbein portraits, radiating power and confidence. This is a man trapped in the decaying prison of his own body, his world shrunk to this suffocating, opulent room. In the brittle silence between his roars of pain and bellows for wine, what fills the void? In the long, dark hours of the night when the sycophants and servants have retreated, what thoughts haunt the mind of a king who remade a nation in the image of his own desires? Does he see the faces of the wives he discarded, the friends he executed, the faith he shattered? Or does he only see the reflection of a king who did what he must? This is the ultimate mystery of Henry VIII. In his final days, consumed by agony, did he regret it all? To answer that question, we must first understand what there was to regret. And for that, we must venture into the whispering gallery of ghosts that surely haunted his final moments. The first and perhaps the most formidable ghost would have worn the crown of Spain, Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, his brother's widow, his queen for over 20 years, a woman of unshakable piety and regal dignity. He had moved heaven and earth to cast her aside, tearing his kingdom from the bedrock of the Roman Catholic Church, a schism that fractured 1,000 years of tradition. He had declared her a sinner, their marriage invalid, their daughter, Mary, a bastard. All for what? For a son, for an heir. Did he, in the quiet of the night, ever question that decision? Did he ever wonder if the Pope and all of Christendom had been right? Did he fear that he had damned his own soul and the soul of his nation for a political necessity? There are tantalizing hints. When Catherine died in lonely exile, she was still signing her letters Catherine the Queen. And Henry, upon hearing the news, did not celebrate. He ordered his court into mourning and arranged for her to be buried with the ceremony befitting a Dowager Princess of Wales, a title she would have despised, but a royal honor nonetheless. Was this remorse? Or simply the final grudging respect for a woman who was, by any measure, his equal in stubbornness and royal pride? Her ghost represents not just a discarded wife, but the weight of a monumental, soul-altering decision. And then there is the second ghost, the one whose name was a whisper, a scandal, a revolution. Anne Boleyn, the catalyst, the woman for whom he had sundered the church, the prize at the center of his great matter. Her dark eyes had bewitched him. Her sharp wit had captivated him. He had pursued her for nearly a decade, his obsession growing with every denial. He had placed a crown on her head, only to order it struck off 3 years later with a single brutal swing of a sword. The charges against her were almost certainly fabricated: adultery, incest, treason. They were a convenient fiction to solve an inconvenient problem. She had failed, just as Catherine had, to give him a son. and her fiery, independent spirit, which had once so enthralled him, had become an intolerable challenge to his absolute authority. But the act of executing a crowned and anointed queen, his own wife, was unprecedented. It shocked Europe. It must have, on some level, shocked him. In his final days, did he see her face in the flickering candlelight? Did he remember the passion, the promises, the fierce intelligence he had sought to possess and then to extinguish? He had famously imported a skilled swordsman from France to ensure her death was swift and clean. Was this a final twisted act of mercy? A sign of a troubled conscience? Or was it simply the fastidious demand of a tyrant who wanted even his executions performed with a certain grim panache? Her ghost is not just of a wife, but of a passion that curled into a murderous rage, leaving a living legacy in the fiery-haired daughter she left behind, Elizabeth.
But Henry's potential regrets extend far beyond his marital bed. He had unleashed a whirlwind upon his own kingdom. The dissolution of the monasteries, a policy executed with ruthless efficiency by his minister Thomas Cromwell, was a cultural cataclysm. Hundreds of ancient abbeys and priories, centers of learning, charity, and art for centuries, were shattered. Their lands were seized by the crown, their treasures melted down, their libraries scattered to the winds. It was an act of immense vandalism, but also a political masterstroke that enriched the crown and created a new class of gentry whose loyalty was bought with church lands. Did the old king, who saw himself as a scholar and a man of God, ever feel a pang of regret for this destruction? Did he mourn the loss of the beautiful illuminated manuscripts, the stunning stained glass windows, the serene cloisters now open to the wind and rain? Perhaps a more potent source of regret was the brutal way he had crushed all opposition. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive popular uprising in the north of England by commoners who wanted their old religion and their monasteries back, was met with a wave of merciless suppression. Henry promised pardons, then reneged, executing hundreds of the rebellion's leaders in the most gruesome ways imaginable. Men were hung, drawn, and quartered, their heads placed on spikes as a warning. It was a clear message: the king's will was absolute. But in his final, pain-racked days, did he ever consider the cost of that will? Did he regret the blood of his own subjects, spilled not in a foreign war but in the fields and villages of his own kingdom? And the ghosts kept coming. Jane Seymour, the wife who had finally given him his precious son Edward, only to die from a fever days later. He had declared her his only true wife. Did he regret his inability to protect the one woman who had fulfilled his life's ambition? Then Anne of Cleves, the Flanders mare, a diplomatic marriage that ended in humiliation and a swift annulment. A regret, perhaps, not of cruelty, but of being made to look a fool. And finally, the most painful ghost of his later years, Catherine Howard. A vivacious, foolish young girl, a teenager, married to an obese, aging, and increasingly volatile king. Her subsequent adultery was not just a personal betrayal, it was a mortal wound to his pride, a mockery of his kingship. Her execution was swift and pathetic. Did he regret his choice? Did he regret the pathetic spectacle of an old man trying to recapture his youth, only to be cuckolded in front of his entire court? Her ghost is one of humiliation, of a king forced to confront his own physical decay and the loss of his legendary virility. So the case for regret is strong. A gallery of discarded wives, executed friends like Thomas More and Thomas Cromwell, a shattered church, and a kingdom traumatized by his whims. It seems impossible that a man could commit such acts and not be haunted. But now we must consider the alternative. We must enter the fortress of the king's ego. For there is an equally compelling case to be made that Henry VIII regretted nothing. To understand this, we must understand how Henry saw himself. He was not just a king, he was God's chosen instrument on earth. He had an unshakable belief in his own divine right. The turmoil, the executions, the break with Rome, these were not, in his mind, acts of tyranny. They were the painful but necessary actions of a king guided by God to save his kingdom. He had read his Bible and convinced himself that his marriage to Catherine of Aragon was a sin in God's eyes, and that his lack of a male heir was divine punishment. Therefore, annulling the marriage wasn't the selfish desire, it was a holy duty. Once he declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, his self-perception became even more grandiose. He was England's Pope. His will and God's will were one and the same. How can one regret fulfilling a divine mission? The monks in the monasteries weren't pious men, they were corrupt traitors loyal to a foreign power. The rebels in the Pilgrimage of Grace weren't faithful subjects, they were heretics challenging God's chosen ruler. In the mind of a megalomaniac, there are no mistakes, only betrayals by others. Anne Boleyn wasn't a victim, she was a witch who had ensnared him. Catherine Howard wasn't a frightened girl, she was a wanton traitor who had shamed him. The fault always lay elsewhere. And then there was the one justification that could trump all others, the one that had driven him from the very beginning: the dynasty. The Tudor claim to the throne was new, forged in the bloody chaos of the Wars of the Roses. Henry had grown up with the terrifying stories of that civil war, a time when England tore itself apart over a contested succession. His one overriding obsession, his sacred duty, was to secure the throne and prevent that from ever happening again. And that required a male heir. From this perspective, all his actions, however cruel, become grimly logical. Catherine of Aragon had to go because she could not produce a son. Anne Boleyn had to go because she had failed and become a political liability. The church had to be broken because the Pope stood in the way of the heir. Everything was subordinate to this one all-important goal. In his final days, he could look upon his son, the young Prince Edward, and see not the ghosts of the women he had destroyed, but the fruit of his life's work. He could see a secure succession, a stable kingdom, a legacy. He might not have regretted the bloody path if he believed it had led to this righteous destination. So we are left with two Henrys: the haunted tyrant, tormented by the ghosts of his past, and the divinely ordained patriarch, secure in the knowledge that he had saved his kingdom. Which one was real? The final scene of his life offers one last, tantalizing clue. As the end drew near, his courtiers, terrified of broaching the subject of death with the volatile king, hesitated to call for a priest. Finally, one brave man, Sir Anthony Denny, leaned in and told the king that in man's judgment he was near death and that he should remember his salvation through Christ. He urged the king to see a priest. Henry, surprisingly calm, refused. He said he would take a little sleep, and if he woke, he would think about it. Later, when he was truly fading, he was asked again if he wanted a priest. He said he wanted to see one man, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the man who had helped him annul his first marriage and break with Rome. But Cranmer was miles away at his palace in Croydon. A frantic, desperate ride through the night ensued. By the time a mud-spattered Cranmer arrived at the king's bedside, Henry was speechless. Cranmer, holding the king's hand, urged him to give a sign that he died in the faith of Christ. The king, it is said, squeezed his hand. And then, he was gone. What does this final act tell us? Did he call for Cranmer, his old friend and partner in revolution, as a final act of defiance against the old faith, a reaffirmation of his life's work? Or did he call for him out of terror, seeking absolution from the one man who might understand the true weight of the sins they had committed together? Was that final squeeze a sign of faith, or the last desperate clutch of a drowning man? We can never know. Perhaps the most fitting postscript is a legend, likely untrue, but powerful in its symbolism.
The story goes that as his massive, lead-lined coffin was being transported to Windsor for burial, it rested overnight in a ruined monastery. During the night, the coffin burst open from the pressure of the gases inside, and in the morning, dogs were found licking up the king's blood from the floor. A grim, Gothic fulfillment of a prophecy made by a friar whom Henry had condemned. Did Henry VIII regret it all? The question presumes a capacity for introspection that he may never have possessed. He was a man of gargantuan appetites and a colossal ego, a man of deep faith and breathtaking cruelty. He was a king who believed he was the state and that his soul was the soul of his nation. To regret his actions would have been to regret England's very existence as he had forged it. The answer, then, may be that the question itself is the point. The internal war between Henry the man and Henry the king, between his conscience and his conviction, was never settled. And in that unresolved conflict, in that dark and bloody mystery, the modern world, with all its tensions between individual desire and national destiny, was born.
In that unresolved conflict, the modern world was born. A powerful reminder of how the inner lives of the powerful can shape the outer lives of us all. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like the video and subscribe to Ages Unseen for more conceptual history. Thanks for watching.